Good evening, everybody. My name's Stuart Newstead. By day, I run a telecoms and digital consultancy called Hare, and by evening, I talk to my friends. And when we were putting together this event, so welcome to the Entrepreneur's Journey. When we were putting this event together, we thought, I was reminded of a very interesting bit of analysis from the Second World War. In World War II, Bomber Command was very worried about the losses of bombers, and wanted to try and improve the armour. It's a very delicate balance, so it makes the planes heavier, it makes them slower, but makes them harder to shoot down. And so they had the bright idea of saying, well, look, when the bombers come back, we'll look where the holes are, and then we'll put armour there. And they then wisely went and asked a statistician what they should do. And he said, no, that's the last thing you should do. What we should do is work out where the holes are in the ones that come back, and put the armour elsewhere. Because the ones that we want to improve are the ones that don't come back, the ones that don't survive. Now, luckily, we've got an entrepreneur who has survived here tonight, rather than one who hasn't. But it's worth remembering that there will be many who kind of fall by the wayside, but we're going to try and find out what it is that makes Matthew tick and what's brought him that success. So, welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Stuart.
And
I'm a surviving bomber pilot.
Yep, that's great. And what we're going to do, Matthew, I've got a few questions for Matthew, which will take us for the first part, maybe about 10, 15 minutes, but we very much would like your input, your questions, and also it'd be far more fun asking him questions that he doesn't know are coming, rather than asking questions that he's got a vague idea that are coming. But let me start. Tonight it's called the Entrepreneur's Journey, Matthew. I guess maybe start with how would you define an entrepreneur?
Well, I think firstly you're someone who sees the world and sees the opportunity and then decides to do something about it. And the opportunity being to do something in the world that's better, and you're doing something better that's for profit. I mean, so it's not like being an artist deciding you can paint a brilliant picture. It is actually finding a problem and solving it, where the solving of it creates more resources than actually you expend in order to produce whatever it is you're doing. So that's what being an entrepreneur is, and it's corralling all those different things you need to do, whilst putting 7 teacups on your nose and balancing on a tightrope in a gale. So apart from that, it's really very straightforward.
And have you always been like that?
Probably, yes. In fact, Mike's here, who's known me since I was less than 1. I've probably always been a bit like this, but certainly from when I left school, and I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to America and spent a year in high school in America, which taught you all sorts of interesting things that maybe I'll talk about after this meeting about drugs and things like that. But it does really open your eyes to thinking that actually anything is possible, and I think that's an important lesson that I've carried on throughout my life for things that gone badly and well. Is if you put your mind to it and really work at it and persevere, and hopefully get lucky, you really can achieve some very interesting things.
And so, could you just talk, as you say, you went to high school, could you just talk us through the next stage and how you went through the last bit of education and then on into the world of work?
Yeah, well, so my when I was so I went to high school, then I went on to university down to Bristol, studied economics, which is a pretty good course for business, although it isn't called a business course. It's about how do you interact words and numbers together to come up with ideas and to describe things that are going on, which is quite handy. And from there, actually in the milk round, which I know they don't really have at universities anymore, but they did when I was there. I went off to an engineering company called Gigaclear Electronics. To an interview as the only non-engineer there, and I said, well, I read in the newspaper that you've just been awarded a license for a mobile telephone network, and I'd like to come and work for you on your new mobile telephone network license. And this was in 1983, and they actually had no idea what I was talking about. Which isn't the first time that's happened to me. And they basically, the recruiter there said, well, hold on a minute. And he went down to the payphone, because that's what you did in those days.
Is it working?
And it was working. Yeah, well, it had to. Those are the only ways you can make phone calls. And he called back to Gigaclear Electronics headquarters and said, there's this chap here who's come for an interview, but we don't know what he's talking about. Are we building a mobile telephone network? And they said, well, yes, we are. And we have just announced it a few weeks ago. And I ended up getting a position at what became Vodafone on the 1st of January 1985, and spent the sort of the summer and autumn of 84 working there as well. And I did photocopying, I did drive testing. Now, drive testing sounds like the most fabulous thing, but when you drive up and down the A4 outside Newbury, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's possibly not the most exciting thing to actually do. But it's really, you know, starting out at the absolutely at the bottom in Vodafone as it became, and again that made me think that actually, you know, with the right technology, the right idea, and the right people, you really can start to change the world in a very positive way.
And so you started as an employee, you know, you didn't
I did.
immediately kind of...
I wasn't actually chief executive or founder, funny enough.
Funny enough. So at what point did you think, okay, you know, I can and should go and do something myself?
Well, I am possibly slightly big-headed and opinionated, which might help if you're an entrepreneur, but it does mean you make some quite foolish decisions from time to time. And after a couple of years at Vodafone, I decided that, well, I've got this really good idea for an interactive cable TV game show. But in 1987, it really wasn't a great idea because the technology and the market absolutely wasn't there. But I went over to America to realize my dream, lost all my money, and came back at the end of the year and got a job selling software. So it was a very salutary experience of really teaching me actually there's an awful lot more to a successful business than just a good idea. It's not that a good idea isn't an important place to start, but it needs to be a good idea for the time, so for the market. And so good ideas are about actually finding something that people want to pay you money for if in business, if you want them to be successful. And it wasn't that interactive cable TV shows didn't actually end up being a massive thing in the 90s, because they did, but in the 80s, the technology, the market, and everything else just wasn't there.
Okay, and so if you can think back to that, so what surprised you the most over in the States in going through that experience?
Oh, just the huge amount of things that I thought I knew that I actually hadn't had a clue on. I mean, it was the sort of Donald Rumsfeld moment, you know, all the, you know, the number of unknown knowns or known unknowns or whatever, however that phrase goes, it was just absolutely enormous. And it is, you know, something that when you're not a software developer writing a piece of code, you know, or an engineer solving a specific engineering problem, which of course means you don't necessarily need to have a team around you. When you're what I am, which is essentially a salesman, you know, you actually need to be able to corral the resources of other people and actually put them together in a formula that makes sense. And for that, you actually need a lot of experience, you know, at least a decade and probably more of actually being in a business to understand how a business works. I've often had people come up to me and say, you know, I'm thinking of starting a restaurant. What do you think? And I go, have you ever worked in a restaurant? And they go, well, no, but, you know, I cook at home, so isn't that the same thing? And I say, well, it is the same thing, but not quite in the way that's ever going to make you money. And what you really should do is, if you want to learn how a restaurant works, is go and get someone to employ you in their restaurant, be paid. Okay, you might have to work long hours and unsociable hours and everything, but be paid as to learn how a restaurant works. And then you can go and start your own restaurant, because then you know you're not on your money learning all the stuff that someone else will pay you to learn. So I think there's a lot to be had from other people. And in a restaurant, you know, the classic thing is, there's fundamentally two different things that go on, like in many businesses. There's production, there's distribution. So distribution is what happens at the front of the restaurant, dealing with the customers, and production is what happens at the back of the restaurant in the kitchen. And usually those are completely different skill sets. And so it's actually understanding that you need a partner, at least one, to actually make that business a fabulous success.
Good, and we'll pick up on some of these points again in more detail. I just want to kind of continue the journey through your career. So you kind of come back, get a job working, selling software for a while, and then get the bug again.
Back into telecoms, and because I was sort of missing the whole sort of mobile phone thing, went into work for a business called Millicom Cellular, and and had some pretty good ideas as to how they could sell a huge amount more phones than they were selling. And over 2 years managed to turn their business, and I was what they in those days called the distribution manager, and that was running their indirect sales channel. And basically I took the business from being about the 30th biggest service provider in the UK to the 5th biggest over those 2 years, purely by driving a huge amount of volume through their distribution channel. And obviously I was supported by lots of great people in the business, but it was just a series of really cracking ideas that we executed on very well. The most fun of them was called Get Going to the USA, and we did a deal with Virgin Travel when Virgin Travel first launched, and basically I think I could buy a return holiday in Florida for £169 from them wholesale. And basically I said, if you sell 6 mobile phones in the next 3 months, I will give you a return ticket to Florida. Return holiday to Florida. And if you sell double that, you get 2. And if you sell treble that, you get 3. And we just exploded. It was the right promotion at the right time. And we just went mad with the volume of sales we put through the business.
Just fascinating, but that was the target. So 6 or 12 was the target. It wasn't 12,000, 12 million. It was 6.
No, and so literally after the end of those 3 months, we had people who took the whole company and all of the families of all of their employees to Florida for a week's holiday.
That's good. There seems to be about alignment of incentives there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So Millicom, great. Virgin Travel.
Yeah, and did a whole bunch of stuff with. Then I got involved in setting up a little mobile phone business called Orange as part of the Chinovik Group. It wasn't called Orange when we first started. It was called British Aerospace Personal Communications Networks Limited. I can't think why we rebranded it. And that was part of it. So the Chinovik Group was the original partner. We then got a bunch of other telcos and most importantly, British Aerospace. British Aerospace at the time had huge political power because they'd just signed the Al Yamamah deal, or Al Yamani deal in Saudi Arabia, where they were like selling 500 years worth of exports in 1 minute to the Saudi Arabians. So they were the right partner to have if you wanted to win a license from the government, and went on to do that and then to do some other things in Chinovik, but eventually left there and starting my own businesses.
And what made you feel the time was right to go and have another go at your own business again?
Well, that was really dead easy. The Chinovik Group was run by a guy called Jan Stenbeck, who's a billionaire, and the group is now run by his daughter, Christina Stenbeck. I disagreed with Jan Stenbeck. I don't know if anyone here has ever worked for a billionaire. No? Well, when they say, yes, okay. Well, if they say turn left and you say no, turn right, and they say, no, Matthew, turn left, and you go, no, we've got to turn right, and they go, goodbye, Matthew, enjoy turning right. And so we had we parted company, so that was pretty straightforward. They asked me to leave, and then I thought, well, this is 1996. The internet might be quite interesting. I wonder if there's any opportunity there. And so I started an internet service provider in 1996. Mm-hmm. Started it with four friends who invested in the business, but they were non-executive, and I was running the business.
What would you say by now? What have been the biggest lessons that you've kind of accumulated that made it maybe more likely that this one was going to work? As you said, you've been working for 10, 15 years by now.
Yes. So at that point, I didn't really have any capital or any experience of successfully raising capital on my own. So I thought the internet looked pretty interesting, and I thought, for a relatively small amount of money, you could actually start a business and start selling things to people, which proved, very quickly whether or not you were going to be successful. Some of the things we tried to do, literally within weeks, we worked out no one was ever going to pay us for. Now, bizarre to think then, a modem, the thing you needed to actually connect to the internet, cost £260 and you were selling access to the internet for £10 a month. So, it was kind of a really, so there are all sorts of things that you needed to learn really quite quickly as to actually who would pay money for what. So it was a very, very interesting time. But we gradually built that business up. Eventually I persuaded Mike Mulford, who's sitting out there somewhere, to come and join me as my business partner after 4 or 5 years. And we managed to turn that business into something fairly successful. I mean, not dramatically successful, but we did manage to weather the dot-com crash and still have a business out the back of it, which was quite an interesting experience. And eventually we split the business in two and sold both halves in 2008, then 2010. And along the way, I went and raised money from VCs and learnt lots about fundraising during that business and what worked and what didn't work. One of those lessons I keep learning the wrong way, that basically if you have people who haven't got the capacity today, they are not going to have the capacity to take the business where it needs to go tomorrow. But that's probably, we could probably spend all evening just talking about that.
So we're getting reasonably up to date with one more big step and then a potential future step. So just tell us about the next one.
Yeah, so when we sold the last bit of community internet that some people here may have been customers for at some point, because we had a lot of customers around Oxford, basically I lived in a rural area, and BT had zero interest in providing service to people who lived in rural areas. And I was of the belief that, unlike most things in telecoms, where you just do the same as BT and cheaper, I had the radical, completely radical idea that if you gave people a better product, they'd actually pay you more money than they're currently paying BT. And we did manage to prove that's correct. It was difficult, I've got to say, and actually there's a few people here in the audience who were one way or the other involved in Gigaclear as customers or supporters or challengers. But over the years we did manage to prove that actually not only was the demand in rural areas for a better product that people would pay more money for, but also that you could get the network built at a cost that meant you could give us a sensible return to investors. And one massive thing that helped during that whole process was EIS. So, we raised just a smidgen under the limit of £10 million worth of EIS money after literally thousands of individual presentations by me. But we did eventually raise really quite a lot of money, and that actually built enough of a proof point to then first we got Neil Woodford as our first institutional investor, and then lots of others afterwards. But it was a very interesting experience, and I was learning a huge amount at the time about what investors want. And the secret, for those of you who don't know, is they want to make money.
That's okay. And so, as you say, you were obviously, as people would know, you were very much personally associated with it. Your face is the brand. Even here, your picture for this event still has an orange, an orange background. Everything's orange. And Matthew, Gigaclear became always quoted in the FT as the sort of example of the rural thing. So how did it feel when one of the main investors then turned around and said, actually, we'd like to buy the rest of your company now? Yeah,
well, I wasn't enormously enthusiastic. So I certainly felt like it was unfinished business for me. I wasn't trying to sell the business. I had a number of very robust discussions with Infra Capital, the person who bought us out, over sort of 9 months, explaining how I wanted to take the business forward and how I saw we could do it and how we could do it with them still being the biggest shareholder. And in the end, they just didn't agree. And so we were a PLC, unlisted PLC as it happened, but we were still a PLC. We had 120 something or other shareholders. And as such, we came completely under the takeover code. So they used the takeover code to basically formally table an offer, and they got our next two biggest shareholders to support the offer. So it was a done deal, even though it was a public offering, and in theory someone else could have come along and offered more money. they weren't selling, and they'd already got the other two biggest shareholders to agree to support the deal, and therefore, they were going to get it. And at that point, I had a really tough decision to make. Do I stay on? And I was all in. Sorry. We were all into Gigaclear. My wife Emma and I are sitting at the back. I mean, we were absolutely all in. Every penny we had, every asset we had was all in that business. And we had a really tough decision to make. Did we stay and stay continuing with that with Infra Capital as the majority owner? Or did we choose to take the opportunity to leave our little baby behind and hope that as a teenager it was going to be successful, outside the house? And we went for the obviously for selling our stake. And they paid a very full price. I mean, I'm not complaining about the money they gave us, but emotionally, I was not in the place ready to go, and certainly. I think it has proved to be quite disruptive for the business with me leaving. They've had a lot of other people leave the business in the last 9 months now since I left. But I still wish them every success, and met the new chief executive, and try to help him wherever I can. So it's still definitely I'm emotionally committed to their success still, even if I can't actually do anything about it.
It's interesting when you mentioned about the emotional attachment, because you start off by saying, well, entrepreneurs are in it for the money. That's not quite what you said, but you say entrepreneurs spot financial opportunity, but you sound the emotional.
Yeah, so and I honestly think that most entrepreneurs are absolutely not in it for their making money themselves. But if you haven't got a proposition where you take X resources and you get to Y resources, and Y is bigger than X, you are not going to do it very long. But I think most entrepreneurs aren't in it for the money. But if you do something great, then fantastic, you get well rewarded. But that isn't the motivation. It's actually about doing something different, and making a change and making a difference.
I'm going to ask Matthew just one more question for now. But then then feel free to ask a question. Just raise your hand in a sec, because we do want your question. Obviously, Matthew's very open, very honest, and very insightful as well. He's mainly honest, anyways. So my question now is you've now chosen, and it's public, to start again, to have another go. So
I have.
what's certainly financially, but imagine you didn't need. But what's the drive? What's the drive for that? I mean, maybe not everybody would know about Zoom, so you might want to.
Okay, so I have started a new business called Zoom. Zoom is building new fibre networks in towns, as opposed. So Gigaclear was very much rural, solving the rural problem, and is still going to be doing that for the next 10 or 15 years, building networks and building and building. But there is a big opportunity in towns as well. Not necessarily where people haven't got service they think that is good enough, because a lot of the places that we're going to be going to, they already have a 50 megabit per second internet service over the BT copper infrastructure. So a lot of people won't say, I cannot live my life. I cannot do what I want to do. But that's only because they don't know that they can't live their life. So what we're going to show them is that their life could be 10 times better on Zoom, at least. And that's because by putting a fibre network in, you essentially remove the communications bottleneck that always sits there on a copper network. However quick you make the copper go, it's never really unlimited. And the whole world is moving from copper to fibre. So it's not just something that's happening here in the UK. But in the UK at the moment, there's just about 2.4 million properties that have a full fibre connection to them. So the vast majority, at about 30 million. So there is just a huge amount that needs to be done. And I absolutely see the opportunity to go again. I'm not ready to retire. We did, I'm saying we, Emma, we did just have 6 months off, enforced, contractually enforced. So, I couldn't actually do anything at all. 3 months was great, including 5 weeks driving around Italy, which was, I've got to say, I highly recommend it. It was really, really good fun. And I didn't get much fatter there. I was actually this fat before I started. and but then I just kept, I found it incredibly frustrating not to be able to work. I actually really enjoy working. I don't know if you can tell from looking at me, but I think it's brilliant fun. And there's some key things you need to do to make that happen. I mean, you need a no arseholes rule in your company. It is never worth having an arsehole in the company, male or female, it doesn't make any difference, because they are so toxic to people wanting to enjoy coming to work every day. Having people you enjoy working with is absolutely brilliant and to be recommended at every opportunity. But that doesn't mean to say that the person who is great today can help the company get where it is tomorrow. So you do, as a leader, need to have totally tough conversations with people about, Matthew, you've done a great job, but I now need to put you into a different role in the company, and you aren't going to be as senior, as important, as with as big a title or whatever it happens to be as you've had before. And here are the reasons why. And I can understand if you don't want to do that, and Matthew, you're going to have to leave. But I really want you to stay, and this is how I think you would be fabulously successful in your new role. And many of us just put that conversation off because it all seems too difficult. But by not making those people changes, it means the company can't grow in the way it needs to grow.
I've got a question, just one quick follow-up, if I may. Going back to the previous bit, how are you if somebody said, when you say, Stuart, we need to turn left, and I say, no, we need to turn right?
I'm afraid, the reality is you're a boat. I always use the analogy of we're on a ship. If you're in a company, you're in a ship, which of course is the reason why companies were formed in the first place. They were ships companies. But let's not go there. Back to Elizabethan times, yeah. But you're on a ship, and therefore the thing about being in a company is you actually have a common purpose, sailing the ship in a single direction. That way. And anybody who either doesn't want to do their bit about sailing the ship or thinks the ship should go a different way from the captain needs to be on a different ship.
Okay, just slightly holding that point. What if somebody at the front says, that bit of white out there?
Yeah.
You think it's a cloud, but it kind of looks like an iceberg to me.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
So clearly the thing about being a leader is you do actually need to listen to people who know more than you, because the thing about building a great business is actually you end up employing people who are much better at the bit they're doing than you were doing it. So if you start from just you in a company, you have to do everything, okay? Now, if you've got any sense, the things you're worst at that are most important to the business, that's what you then go and recruit the best possible person you can find to do those bits for you. Now, if you go and recruit the best possible person you can find who's better at those things than you are, and then you don't listen to them, there's only one or two things that are going to happen. Either they're going to leave or you're going to hit the iceberg.
Yep, good. Thanks very much. So the gentleman in the blue shirt was first, then I'll come to you next, sir. Oh, that's okay. That's okay. He listened. That's okay. So we'll come to you, sir.
Well, I find it completely unsurprising that you're focusing on cities, because I sometimes talk to people on Skype in Soho who complain how bad their internet connection is, whereas, I in the rural Chiltern get 30 megabytes per second now. So, I completely understand that direction. But what I wanted to ask about is really sort of, how far it is about people. You mentioned the bit about the assholes and so on, and about the icebergs. Go a bit more into that, how much that is part of the entrepreneurial journey. Finding the right people, how do you find them, what are you looking out for, how do you, when the a-holes sort of reveal themselves, usually then it's quite too late, and then, you have to troubleshoot, how do you spot those and move them out of the way?
Great, I'm just going to summarise it for the rest of the room. So basically, how do you go and build the team, and how do you keep regenerating the team? Yeah. So whether you like Man United or not, Alex Ferguson style.
Yeah, so I think the advantage of having been relatively successful previously is you do actually attract lots of talent So like Man United, lots of people want to go. Well, they did want to go and play for Man United. Maybe not quite so many now. It was very aspirational as a footballer to go and play there. And so I do have an advantage now in that lots of the people in our industry are key. Now they know I've started another business, are very keen to come and work. But then how do you pick the right people? And I think that's, so firstly, it is about, doing some of the basics right. So really referencing potential employees properly. One thing I try and do for all the senior people that I interview is I interview them in 2 different environments. So I'll have them into the office, and then maybe I'll take them out for dinner or for lunch or for, meet them at a conference in a different environment. Because again, you put people in a different environment and they actually behave differently. There is, I think, I don't have a magic bullet to how to get it right. I'm just aiming for a much better than 50% success rate on getting the right people in the right job. And I think if you can do that, you can do pretty well. The nice thing about employing good people is that they themselves then attract good people to the company. So again, and the more senior the people you're interviewing, the more interested they are in understanding how the whole company is actually going to work. Not just their bit, not if they're doing sales, they don't want to just understand what they need to do for sales to be successful. They actually want to understand that the product is actually going to work really well, that there's actually a development pipeline that means the product's going to be really good next year, that actually the customer service team actually answers the phone, so when their customers that they've spent a year getting don't get such rubbish service the first time they call in that they cancel the contract. So, the more senior the people are in the business, the more they want to understand the business. So that means when you're talking to people about joining the business, you've got to be really clear about articulating what it is you're trying to do and why that's important and why they're going to enjoy working as part of the team. And then I think the final bit I'd say is that, again, like a ship, you cannot have everybody who's good at standing in the crow's nest. Yes, you need 1 or 2 people who are good at that, but you also need people who can, run up and down the sails. You need people who can, fix the leaks in the bottom of the boat and all the other. So you need to build a team of people who have complementary skills. And that means you then end up with this problem of, a great engineer and a great salesperson, they are like this. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but they can hardly even see each other, let alone communicate with each other, because the way they think about problems is dramatically different. And the view they have as to what's going on is very different. So that whole issue of actually helping the salesman to understand how the engineer thinks about things, so the salesperson can ask the engineer in a way that for something in a way the engineer can understand, and then doing it the other way around, explaining to the engineer, what it is about a salesperson that means that, you need to communicate with them differently so they can understand what you're saying back to them.
It's very interesting because to my mind, I've always thought that's a very much underrated part of leadership, that ability to get people working together. People tend to have this notion of the sort of the charismatic out there leader knowing it all. What you're describing is also somebody who can make the bigger than the sum of the parts, with the different, especially with those different skills and the speaking almost different languages.
Yeah, and there are differences. I mean, for the last, whatever it is, 20 years, I've been trying to build successful companies, and that probably is different than someone who's trying to build a great bit of software or, do some specific bit of engineering or, is trying to develop a new plant or something that maybe, those skills might not be quite as important. But if you look at successful teams in any activity, a successful football team, it's successful because you've got a bunch of different people with different skills who are all working to a common goal and making allowances for the strengths and weaknesses of their fellow team members. Mm-hmm. And that analogy in sport works absolutely, brilliantly in business as well. But the same thing, if you have a stinker on the pitch, they're going to cause a nightmare for the entire team.
Yep, very good. Yep, certainly. Just a quick question on leadership. I was in the army for a fair while before leaving, and one of the things that I found in civilian organisations is, to a very large extent, the ineptitude of the leadership that I found. Interestingly, on the first day of Sandhurst, everyone gets given a small book, and there's all sorts of stuff on leadership in there. The first quote is from Field Marshal Lord Slynn. It says, very simply, leadership is just plain you. To what extent do you think that's relevant to civilian organisations?
Totally.
So, question back, yeah. So only because we're recording this thing. Thanks. So what is leadership more than just playing you, and that from the Sandhurst manuals?
So you cannot lead in any other way than you. It is, there's no point saying, I'm going to be Richard Branson, and that's how I'm going to lead. I'm going to do what Richard Branson does, because it's going to be completely inauthentic to everybody. So you need to be, I don't know, somebody else said it, the best you can be. Yeah. It isn't about, and that means understanding your weaknesses. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I'm absolutely rubbish at, and those are the things I try and get other people to come and do for me much better than I can ever do. One of the things I'm actually quite poor at is coaching my direct reports, which is, I know, a real blind spot for me, because I think, if I've explained to someone what they're meant to be doing and they've agreed that's what they're meant to be doing, well, why do they need help from me? Because we've already discussed that, we've agreed it, come back to me when it's done, or if you've got a problem. But apart from that, just, that's fine. And I think and that isn't what a great coach does. And I know, and I've worked with people who are just like 1,000 times better at this than me. And you see them, sitting over a cup of coffee with an employee, and all they're doing is actually just verbally just running through all the challenges that they're currently working on and making sure they're actually spending their time on solving the problems that are really going to make a difference, and not spending time spinning their wheels on stuff they can't fix.
But the crucial bit there is having the self-awareness to know and admit what you're not so good at.
And that is one of the great things about getting older. You do actually notice the things you're rubbish at much more easily.
And you can accept them.
Yeah,
that's great. Yes, sir.
I have an interesting question for you. If you had your time again, and you actually found yourself in a position of, say, taking part in The Apprentice under Alan Sugar, would you enjoy it? Would you feel you would be successful? Would you become his apprentice?
Okay, if you had your time again and were on The Apprentice, or like in that kind of situation, do you think you would enjoy it and like it?
Well, Alan Sugar's always been a trader. And so all the ways he's always made money is buying at X and selling at X plus Y, and essentially doing that quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker.
So he's a buyer or a seller?
Well, he does both.
both.
So he's a trader.
Trader.
So he generally speaking, he buys 4 million widgets at £1 each, and he sells 4 million widgets for £2 each, and that's sort of the business he's in. I've never been a trader, so I've always tried to create products from scratch, and then sell the output of that. So the way I would look at it is, I'm sure Alan Sugar is extremely interesting, but his business style is quite different to mine.
So you wouldn't like to take part in The Apprentice?
Apart from the fact I don't particularly want to be on TV, although we are being recorded today. I don't think The Apprentice would be quite right for me.
That's okay. You don't have to be strong at everything. I think that's okay. Okay. Do we have another question for Matthew while we're here? Because we'll take Max first, if I may. Then Tony. Then Jen.
So you've obviously done. In fact, you're about to start your second company in very challenging telecoms, where you're up against big giant guys. Entrepreneur comes to you today and says, what are the areas that are? What would you say, other than the world that you've been in, are interesting areas to start companies in today?
What would be interesting areas to start companies in? Not outside of your own.
Crikey, where would you stop? I mean, if you look around yourself, there is almost nothing that can't be improved. I mean, there is almost nothing out there. The challenge is working out, of all those billions of things that you could fix, which are the ones that firstly you know enough about, and secondly that people are actually care enough about, or you can make them care enough about, to pay you money for. But the application of technology to solving everyday problems, there is just a huge amount of it. I mean, I don't know, you could probably pick pretty much any example of anything and you could think how you can make it better. And that is, there's a phrase I wrote down that, if someone can translate into a really snippy Latin form, it would be great. But, imagine a world that you want to live in and work out what's different in that world and how do you get from here to there. Mm-hmm. And that can apply to anything. Now, personally, I find doing stuff in telecoms, having been in telecoms since 1984, is a lot easier. I mean, your domain knowledge, your personal network, your understanding of the uncovered problems is just much more when you keep working in similar or related areas. But there is a huge amount of opportunity out there. It then comes down to partly what resources you've got available to you. So, the more capital you've got, the more difficult the problem you can take on, because cracking difficult problems it's more difficult than you think it's going to be to get there. And so if you want to crack a big problem, you really need to make sure you've got access to a lot of capital, because it's going to take you a long time and a lot of resources to get there.
So you probably would have needed to have proven yourself in order to be credible to get that kind of capital?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Tony. Yeah, thanks.
Matthew, you talked twice about going to America at high school and then going back there again with your first sort of entrepreneurial products. Would you say that the sort of American sort of entrepreneurial approach to business and the sort of energy and the kind of sort of free-flowing way they do things has had an impact on you, or it was too brief to really be a part of your sort of journey, so to speak?
Do you want to repeat?
Yes, I'll repeat the question. So, was there something different actually about America and the entrepreneurial spirit there that drew you, or was it just you happened to be in America?
So I think it is much easier to start businesses in America than it is here. It is much easier to employ people in America than it is here, and the market is much bigger in America than it is here. The homogeneous market, same regulations, same language, same everything. So I think
to capital, for example, it's often quoted as it's much easier to.
Let's come back to access to capital, because I think that's quite interesting, and I'm not sure that the difference is there anymore in that particularly.
Say a bit more about it being easier to employ people.
Yeah, I mean, so now you have to pay 12.8% national insurance, and you have to pay 4.5% pension for every employee in your company. So you can get away with only paying 4% contribution as long as you'll claim that you're never going to pay more than 8% of your payroll in bonuses or something. There's some. I mean, you look at the tax regulations here. I mean, it's not they don't have those in America. It's just the actual cost of all those taxes is much, much lower. So the cost of getting into business here is difficult. And it's just taken me, I still don't have, having applied in December, I still don't have my CIS number for my company, which you need to have if you're going to be in the construction industry. It's a special type of tax. Excellent. Special type of tax if you're going to dig holes anywhere that you have to be able to account for. And without having that number, you cannot actually pay anyone, and therefore you can't do the work. The level of regulation here is really quite significant. On the flip side, EIS has been absolutely fantastic, in my view, for unleashing tens, hundreds of thousands probably by now, of new companies into the wild. Because it's actually allowed semi-professional investors to take gambles on companies that they can have an influence over, coach often, or just invest in, and actually see if it works, because the loss is significantly mitigated. And so I think the whole issue of access to capital, I think there now is, at the bottom end in the UK, I think there is a pretty decent way of accessing capital if your idea looks relatively sensible. I think the problem you have in the UK is
Professional VCs, for example.
So I think the problem
at that early stage when it is risk capital.
Yeah, so VCs, have a very, very specific investment profile that they're looking for, and I think lots of people don't really understand what they're after. I mean, essentially, they're after 10 times their money in 3 years. So that's what they're looking to achieve. And if you can't show them how they're going to be able to achieve that, then you're wasting your time going and talking to them. I think it's not really that bit of the market I think that we're lacking in. I think it's the scale up bit that actually I think is where the problem exists in the UK. Because if you show in the US, in my experience, you have a fabulous idea and you've done enough to prove that it actually works, because the market is essentially 15 times bigger, the amount of capital available to exploit that idea is much, much bigger. But don't think that every idea in America gets funded, because absolutely it doesn't, and they have and they're much quicker to abandon investments in America as well. You didn't make that milestone, that's it. Thanks, Matthew. Off you go. Well, what? But what about the 3 million you've already invested? And they go, we don't care. We're not spending another moment talking to you. Bugger off, die.
So you're back to the bombers that don't return.
Bombers that don't return.
The bombers that don't return. There's a lot more. Yep. So.
What do you think you really got wrong at Gigaclear and you kick yourself to this day?
What was your biggest learning at Gigaclear?
Ever the diplomat.
Well, clearly my biggest error was allowing my biggest investor to get to a position where they could control the future of the company. But that would have happened after the next round anyway. So even because of the amount of capital you need for infrastructure businesses is just vast. So I think the biggest errors, and I made a number of them at Gigaclear, were not acting quickly enough to change out people who either weren't able to work or who'd gone beyond their sell-by date in the role they're in, because the company was more than doubling in every metric every year, and someone who's capable of managing a sales team of 4 might be okay at 8, but when they get to 16 or 32, you actually just need a completely different skill set to do those things. And I think I definitely made at least a dozen mistakes in that one area, probably 20 mistakes over 8 years.
Oh, good. Yes.
So I didn't even learn. I kept repeating the same problems.
That's okay. Could we take the lady next to a female voice for a change? Okay. So, yep. Yep.
You talked, I'm going to stand and sound
That's okay.
you talked very much economically about taking an economic approach to decisions you've made, and you took 9 months off and started a new business, which is amazing. But from a behavioural economics or psychological perspective, are you mentally just got a core, strong focus of control, and you know what you're going to do, or do you have negative scripts like every other person, or you like the good psychopath and just know what you want to do and goes for it?
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, so the question really is, without exposing yourself on the couch or anything like that, but how much do you feel that you're driven in a positive way, and to what extent is let's say the chimp on the shoulder, the doubting one? Is it? So some people are driven from a negative energy, that told they're going to fail. Fear of failure actually drives them forward. To people like Bradley Wiggins, people like that. Others have a sort of relentless positivity. Just when they think the question is, where on that scale are you?
Oh no, I've absolutely got both. So I want to succeed and see how to succeed, and also fear failure. It's not that failure of itself is bad. It's just I'd rather it happen to somebody else.
Okay, that's good. We had, I think, 2 questions here, and then we're probably going to run out of time. So, sir, yes.
Well, it's sort of related to that question, but a bit more broadly. Do you think there are certain personality types that are well suited to the entrepreneurial life, or perhaps more to the point, are there certain personality types that are distinctly not suited to going on to being entrepreneurial?
Okay, so are there certain personality types that are suited to being entrepreneurial and certain types that are not?
So I am not a qualified or even amateur psychologist in any way. However, I am a member of a chief execs club. And we did actually have a psychologist come in to study us all in front of us, which was absolutely fascinating. And of the 80 people in the room, 80 chief executives, they broadly broke down into two categories. People, roughly speaking, like me, so creative, outgoing, enthusiastic risk takers, who had started and were driving their own business, and calculating, articulate, numeric professionals who had been put in to run businesses that someone else had started. And I think there were like 3 other personality types, and I can't remember what they were called really. But basically, we all, you were a real enthusiastic driver, or you were a calculating manager, and they have a bunch of other personality types, and they didn't feature at all amongst the chief executives. Now they did amongst the support staff for the organisation, where you had a bunch of other personality types, but there were none in the.
So would you consider those sort of numeric, analytical folk who've been put into the position rather than created it themselves? Would you consider those sorts of CEOs entrepreneurs?
Oh right, yeah, good thought. So yeah, other people have been put in the second group you described. Would you class them as entrepreneurial?
Yeah, I think they probably are, but a slightly different. They're at a different stage. I mean, they are still. The interesting thing about this chief execs group, it's basically people all across Europe who are all trying to grow their business by doubling or trebling it every year, and so it's across largely tech businesses, but not only that. I mean, we have people who are running restaurant chains and all sorts of things. So I think largely that's the people who've actually started it fall into a similar category to me. But the others are still driving businesses and driving growth and driving change and making things happen.
That's great. We've just got to have one last question, sir. It's you.
Yeah, so actually it sort of ties into that last point, but I was struck by something we were talking about with Gigaclear. Do you think there's a point that businesses reach where the entrepreneurial mindset doesn't add as much value anymore, where you need a different sort of leader? Or do you think there's a place for entrepreneurial thinking even in very big companies? I'm thinking particularly about the way that companies are adopting approaches like agile and sprints and things, even within very substantial organisations.
Okay. Do you think companies grow to a stage when that driving entrepreneurial style, the first group, people like yourself, becomes less relevant?
So I think this is a very interesting question that I'm not sure I've got a clear answer to. You actually see it in other bits in companies, not just at the top. So, and one of the things that we're doing at Zoom is deliberately picking out people who are going to be senior single contributors as opposed to managers. Because, the idea is that some people can make a great contribution, but in some organizations, the only way you get more senior is by being promoted to manage other people. It's a bit like the thing of, you take the best salesman and you go, well, they're bound to be good at sales management. Now, anyone who's ever done this knows that the best way to destroy your best salesman is to make them into a sales manager, because actually it's a completely different skill set from one from the other. Do I think that, I certainly think that that Infra Capital felt that they could do without me in the business, and I suspect they thought that having someone who was bluntly more professional and less passionate would suit them better. I've got to reach that conclusion because I don't work there anymore.
That's fine. So very finally, the last word then, thinking ahead of all the things that you've learned in these last 15 years and even the years before that, which would you say are the either top 2 or top 3 that you're thinking, right, if I do those in Zoom, that'll give us a far better chance because I've now more experience, I'll do these things, and I'll either do them because I did them well before, or I'll do them because I need to be different from before.
Yeah. So I think it is finessing what I did at Gigaclear rather than trying to do it all again differently. And I'm not talking about, I mean, so this is really sort of the very top level of it. It is being really clear where we're going. I mean, that, you know, and the fact that you told someone yesterday that's where you're going doesn't mean to say they remembered it today. So it is about just repeating, where are we going, what are we doing, just all the time in everything you do. So some of you may have noticed that we have quite a strong colour palette for the business.
Do you want to spell? Not everybody knows how it's spelled. Do you want to spell
Oh, it's spelled ZZOOM, and we'll reveal in a couple of months' time why it's spelled like that. There is actually a reason to it, but let's forget that for now. I mean, the colour palette we've picked is bright pink and bright yellow next door to each other, and it's quite strong. You're probably actually going to be able to see that all the way at the back of the room, and that's because standing out and being clear internally as well as to prospective customers that we are something different, and you know, and there's something specific at what we're doing, I think is really important. So I think that's the first thing, is making sure you're really clear on where you're going. The second thing is, you know, in the nicest possible way, thank you very much Infra Capital, because I now have a bit of capital myself. That's meant I can assemble a much more capable start team in a business than otherwise I would have been able to. Because when you can afford to pay market competitive salaries for senior people, even when they'll only have 1 or 2 employees reporting to them, and this is the same in any organisation, you really can attract people who are at the peak of their game, who do have, they're still paying for their kids who are at university, and they're still, you know, they still got their mortgage to pay, and all those other things. All those reasons why, if you don't have cash, it makes it really difficult to get them to come and join the mission that you're on. And so I think those with, you know, having a really clear idea of how I've designed Zoom to behave in the market we're going to be in. So this is, again, a thing that often we talk about at our Chief Execs Club is, as a chief executive, you should be working on the business, not in the business. Your job is to work out how to make the business work, not to do the work. That's probably a great moment to stop.
That's a great place to stop. And thanks. So, absolutely fascinating journey the last hour, and really fantastic insights from Matthew. So please, great thanks to Matthew.